Captain Sarah Ghost Martinez adjusted her civilian blazer and settled into seat 12F aboard the commercial airliner bound for Nellis Air Force Base. To her fellow passengers, she appeared to be just another business traveler in mid-30s, professional attire, laptop bag stowed neatly under the seat in front of her. Nobody would have guessed that the unassuming woman reading a paperback novel was one of the most decorated F-22 Raptor pilots in the United States Air Force. The flight attendant offered her a drink with the same practiced smile she'd given everyone else. "Just water, thanks," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the slightest hint of the Texas drawl that had followed her from San Antonio to the Air Force Academy and through 15 years of military service. As the Boeing 737 climbed through 30,000 feet, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the irony. Here she was, a pilot who regularly pushed the world's most advanced fighter jet through Mach 2, sitting in coach and watching the world crawl by at a mere 500 miles per hour. The contrast wasn't lost on her, but she'd learned long ago to appreciate the simple pleasure of being a passenger instead of the one responsible for keeping everyone in the air. Her phone buzzed with a text from her squadron commander: "Package delayed, new arrival time 1800 hours, ceremony at 1900. Sarah glanced at her watch. The delay would give her just enough time to change into her dress blues before the evening's festivities began. The package was a new F-22 fresh from Lockheed Martin's production line in Marietta, Georgia. As the squadron's most experienced pilot, Sarah had been selected to ferry the aircraft from the factory to Nellis. It should have been a routine flight, but weather delays at the factory had pushed back her departure by 2 days. Rather than wait around, she'd opted to fly commercial and let the factory pilots deliver the aircraft directly to the base. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Las Vegas McCarran International Airport," the captain announced over the intercom. Sarah looked out the window at the sprawling desert city below, its casinos and hotels glittering like scattered diamonds against the tan landscape. Somewhere beyond those lights, nestled in the Nevada Test and Training Range, was her home base, the epicenter of American air superiority. The landing was smooth, and Sarah made her way through the terminal with practiced efficiency. She'd made this trip dozens of times, but tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just another pilot returning from leave. Tonight, she would be honored for something that still felt surreal. Even 6 months later, the ride to Nellis took 20 minutes through the desert highways that connected Las Vegas to the sprawling air base. As the cab approached the main gate, Sarah could see the familiar silhouettes of F-22 Raptors on the flight line, their angular stealth profiles unmistakable even in the fading daylight. Each one represented hundreds of millions of dollars in cutting-edge technology and the pinnacle of American air power. "First time here?" the driver asked, noticing her focused gaze on the aircraft. "Not exactly," Sarah replied with a slight smile. After clearing security and checking into the visiting officers' quarters, Sarah quickly changed into her Air Force dress blues. The dark blue uniform was adorned with the ribbons and medals that told the story of her career. The Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Aerial Achievement Medal, the Air Force Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, and most prominently, the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor Divisia, the decoration that had changed everything. The base club was already buzzing with activity when she arrived. Fellow pilots, ground crew, and base personnel mingled over cocktails and appetizers, their conversations punctuated by the occasional roar of aircraft engines from the nearby runways. Sarah recognized many of the faces of the tight-knit fighter pilot community, men that careers often intersected at bases around the world. Well, if it isn't the famous Ghost," called out Lieutenant Colonel Rick Viper Thompson, her former wingman and longtime friend. "How does it feel to be riding in the back of the bus with the civilians?" "About as exciting as you'd expect," Sarah laughed, accepting his offered handshake. "Though I have to admit, not having to file a flight plan was pretty nice." The banter continued as more pilots joined their group. But Sarah noticed something different in their demeanor. There was a respect in their voices that went beyond simple camaraderie, a deference that made her slightly uncomfortable. She'd worked hard to be accepted as just another pilot in a community that had historically been dominated by men, and she didn't want to be treated differently now. The change had started 6 months ago over the skies of Eastern Europe. Sarah had been leading a 4-ship formation of F-22s on a routine patrol mission when they'd encountered something that definitely wasn't routine. A formation of advanced enemy fighters had strayed into Allied airspace, apparently testing response times and capabilities. What followed was a brief but intense engagement that showcased exactly why the United States had invested so heavily in 5th-generation fighter technology. In less than 3 minutes, Sarah had downed 2 enemy aircraft while coordinating her wingmen to engage the remaining threats. Her call sign, Ghost, had proven prophetic as she'd appeared on enemy radar screens just long enough to launch her missiles before vanishing again into electronic invisibility. The engagement had ended with all Allied aircraft returning safely to base while 4 enemy fighters were either destroyed or forced to retreat. The incident had been classified at the highest levels, but word had leaked through the tight-knit fighter community. Within weeks, Sarah had been awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and found herself something of a legend among her peers. The attention was flattering but also overwhelming for someone who had always preferred to let her flying do the talking. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcement over the club's sound system, "please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes." As the crowd settled into their chairs, Sarah felt a familiar flutter of nerves. She'd rather face a squadron of enemy fighters than speak in front of a crowd, but tonight wasn't about her discomfort, it was about the squadron, the mission, and the incredible machine that had carried her safely through 15 years of flying. Colonel James Hammer Davidson, the wing commander, took the podium with the bearing of a man who'd spent 3 decades in fighter cockpits. His weathered face and graying hair told the story of countless hours in the air, from F-15 Eagles to F-22 Raptors. "We're here tonight to welcome the newest addition to our fleet," he began, his voice carrying the authority that came with command. "But more importantly, we're here to recognize the pilot who will be taking her up for her first flight in Air Force colors." Sarah felt dozens of eyes turn toward her as the colonel continued. "Captain Sarah Martin's, a call sign Ghost, has been selected to conduct the acceptance flight for tail number 094,191. This aircraft represents the pinnacle of American air superiority, and it couldn't be in better hands." The applause was warm and genuine, filled with the kind of respect that could only come from fellow warriors who understood the challenges and responsibilities of strapping on a fighter jet. Sarah stood and nodded to the crowd, her natural humility warring with the pride she felt for her squadron and her service. "Now, I know Ghost would rather be in the cockpit than behind a microphone," the colonel said with a knowing smile, "but we've convinced her to say a few words." Sarah approached the podium, her mind racing through the points she'd prepared, but as she looked out at the assembled pilots and crew members, her extended family, the formal speech she'd planned seemed inadequate. "6 hours ago, I was just another passenger in seat 12F, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But that's the thing about this job, we're never really off duty, whether we're at 35,000 feet in a Raptor or 30,000 feet in coach. We carry the responsibility of defending American airspace and protecting American interests around the world." She paused, looking around the room at faces that had become as familiar as her own reflection. "Tomorrow morning, I'll take 094,191 up for her first flight as an operational Air Force aircraft. But tonight, I want to thank every person in this room for making that possible, from the maintainers who keep these birds flying to the controllers who guide us home. We're all part of something bigger than ourselves." The applause that followed was thunderous, and as Sarah returned to her seat, she felt the familiar surge of pride that came with wearing the uniform. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, surrounded by her fellow airmen, she was reminded of why she'd chosen this life. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Sarah stepped outside into the cool desert air. Above her, the stars shone with the clarity that only came in places far from city lights. Somewhere up there, other pilots were flying patrol missions, maintaining the vigilant watch that had kept America safe for decades. She was just a pilot in C-12F a few hours ago, but she'd never really stopped being Captain Sarah Ghost Martinez, defender of the skies and guardian of freedom.